Just check the YouTube channel. Hi, welcome to the webinar for InnovatED on fundraising and registering your company. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes for folks to join. If you have joined already, please hold on. To identify yourself on the chat box, just put down your name so we know who's attending, but we will get started in a minute. Don't go. Hey, so we hear there's about 5 teams on, so we're gonna get started, and I assume people will join as we keep going. So we're gonna start with, so hi to Rini and Prachur and Prashant and Soumya, and sorry, I'm gonna be looking away because I'm looking at another screen, and Swati and Ankit and Harshdeep and Safdar, fantastic. We have a ton of people here. So we are gonna start with, we're gonna get started with the registration process, and then we're gonna move into the fundraising part of it. If you have any questions at any point, please do type it into the comment section. We'll try and answer along as we go. Hello to Quad. So hi, Vivek, for joining us. We're gonna have slides up. So I'm gonna put up the slide share in just a second. We cannot unfortunately do it on full slide view mode, but if you need to make it bigger, just make your screen bigger and it should work. All right, so you should have the first slide up. Let us know if you can't see the slide. So I'm going to start with registering your enterprise. So I'm not going to tell you the process involved in registering the enterprise. What I'm going to walk you through right now is really the thought process behind whether you want to register as a nonprofit or a for-profit enterprise. I think the big question that people are constantly asking, especially when you're working with a social enterprise, is how do we decide? So as a funder, from the funding perspective, and as a funder working specifically in social impact, we understand that the focus is on the social good. We understand that the company is being set up in order to create that impact for the common good. So the big debate is constantly around whether we want to move into for-profit or non-profit. So I'm gonna leave you guys with a set of questions to ask yourselves, because that is really how you decide whether you want to go into a for-profit or a non-profit structure. Again, just a reminder, at any point if you have questions, please type it in and we will answer them as we go. The first big question really is, what is your vision for your enterprise and what is your vision for yourself? Are you looking at running a business that makes money, however small that money is, however small that revenue is going to be and your margins are going to be? The question is, are you interested in being someone who sets up a successful business? And if that's, your answer to that is a resounding yes, then your answer to the big question is really easy, right? You're going to go down the for-profit route. You're not going to set up a non-profit enterprise. So that's the easy question to answer. I think the more nuanced questions that you need to answer is, what is the business model? What is your product? What is your service? And has it been proven? For companies in the very early stage, for some of you who are still in the process of setting up your projects, you are still developing your product, you're still working on your service, and your business model doesn't exist right now, right? So before you even set up an enterprise, you might want to think about, can this actually make money, right? So if I have a product that I can go out and sell, then that's fantastic. You don't need to raise grants right now. You can actually raise returnable capital. But if all of these are not proven, it makes sense to actually raise grant funding. So think about your model. Think about, is there a market for this? Have people made money from this product or service or business before? And so can it be set up as a for-profit, or does it need to go down the non-profit route? Again, remember, your sources of funding have very different expectations. So if you're receiving grant funding into your organization, the expectation is social return. Whereas if you are receiving equity investment into your company, your investors expect you to return the money, and not just return the money that you received, return it with a certain multiple, right? So if we put in 10 lakhs into your company, we'd like to see us get 20 lakhs back. So really think about whether you can deliver on that investment to your investors, because that is again a huge thought process that you need to go through in terms of thinking about how you want to raise funding and what type of funding you want to raise, and as a consequence, the type of organization you want to set up as. And finally, really think about the timeline for product development, right? How long is it going to take for me to develop my product? How long is it going to take for me to test my product? How long is it going to take for me to get to the market? And maybe you can set up as an ATG company, set up as a Section 8 company to start with and receive grant funding for a lot of this, and then convert to a private limited company. It's possible, but really think about that timeline. If you have a solid product developed and you're ready to go to market and you know you're going to make money from it, then set up as a for-profit business. So I think these are really the things that you need to think about while you're debating amongst your team, within yourself, how you want to set up your enterprise. But I think the fundamental question that you need to ask yourself right now, um, is is your source of revenue clear, right? So who is your customer? How large is that target market? Can you be competitive? And do you have a viable financial plan, right? So when you're talking about who is your customer, some of you are thinking about working with government schools. Some of you are thinking about selling your product or service or working with affordable private schools. The market is large, right? You can sell to 1.5 million schools in the country. But the question is, who's going to pay for this? And just realistically think that even some of our largest education companies in the country are working with a maximum of 20,000 schools, right? But that's still a viable business. So can your customer actually pay for the product, and will they pay at a higher margin than what you're producing your product for? Because that's going to decide if you can make a profit. And if you can make a profit, then you can go down the for-profit route. Also, really look at others in the sector. Look at the companies that are making money, right? Especially in the education sector. It could be a company that's doing 5 crore turnover a year. It could be a company doing 25 crores a year. It doesn't matter. Look and see what products they're selling that is actually making them their money. So really, your source of revenue needs to be clear before you make the decision between for-profit and non-profit. Also remember that even if you have a clear revenue source, some of you can choose to put that money back into your company and choose not to pay yourself a higher dividend, which is also completely acceptable. And it's a choice that you as the founder will need to make, in which case you go down the non-profit route. Right? So I think these are some of the clear distinctions you need to make to yourself before you actually move forward in deciding whether you want to be a for-profit or a non-profit. Again, just a reminder, if you guys have questions, please type them out, and we will respond to you. I think the whether you're a for-profit or a non-profit, and we'll talk about the fundraising bit in a fundraising piece in a bit, but fundraising is work, right? and donor and investor engagement is key. So whether you're raising money from government or CSR or from philanthropic funds or from a regular investor, you need to spend a significant amount of time convincing these people that you need to that they need to put money into your enterprise, right? So fundraising is key. But the bottom line is whether you're running a for-profit business or whether you're running a non-profit entity, you still need to run the enterprise like a business. You still need to think about what are my costs, am I keeping it low? Um, so I think these are the things that you really need to think about as you move forward. We have a question from Vivek that says, how do you estimate the scale of operations in the coming year to estimate next year's budget requirement? Um, Super. So I will answer Rajiv's question in just a second. But Vivek, I think the scale of operations, especially for a startup enterprise, is really dependent on you, right? So if you're currently working with 10 schools in your pilot and you realistically think that you can do 50 schools in your next year, then that's how you estimate your budget. So you set your own operating plan and you decide what you're going to reach. And based on that, you set up your costs, you set up your estimated revenues, you set up your operational costs, your HR, your talent, all of that, and you build your budget. So I think building a budget is a larger a larger piece than we have right now. And maybe we can do that as a separate session, but it's possible. But it really depends on the goals that you set for yourself. Rajiv asked a question about, does the organization need to be incorporated to receive grant funding? So I will answer this from the Will Grow perspective. So we have given out grant funding to people before the organization has been incorporated itself, especially because we work in the in the for-profit space. We recognize that it is extremely difficult to close a company, really easy to open one. So we actually prefer that you don't open a company, start a company until you've got your revenue stream in place. So yeah, we can give grant funding out to individuals. However, just remember, if you're trying to raise funding through CSR or through government, they prefer that you are incorporated. And we'll talk about the timeline for incorporation, but it really doesn't take that much time. So once you've figured out what your model is, you can do that. Vivek, I am gonna actually set up a separate call with you in terms of making a feasible estimation of a budget. I think it's a lot more detailed conversation that we need to get into. But we can talk about that separately if that's okay. All right. So just a couple of things. I know people have asked about whether hybrid models work. So we have worked with companies that have hybrid models, except we need a certain number of things to be in place. Um, One is there a clear segregation in your work, right? Do you know, do you know clearly, is there something that the for-profit is going to do that is distinct from what the non-profit is going to do, right? So I think that is a clear segregation you need to make before you start a hybrid model. I think the second question you need to answer for yourself is, do you have the bandwidth to deal with two different entities? Setting up two entities with their own governance is pretty difficult. And so do I have the bandwidth right now to deal with two different entities? Scrutiny is much higher, especially from any donor coming in. They want to know why you have two entities and what you're doing with them. You need to have defined and clearly segregated governance. And if one entity is actually um, if one entity is actually licensing to another, then you need to have clear licensing agreements to be in place as well. So I think, really think about all of these things before you do a hybrid model where you have two separate entities. I see a lot of questions coming in, so I'm just going to run through the information I have and then I will answer all of the questions at the end, if that's okay. But please keep typing in your questions as we go. So just in terms of non-profit entities, right now you can set up either as a trust, a society, or a Section 8 company. Section 8 companies were previously called Section 25 companies. But these are the three options that you have. Again, Section 8 companies tend to have a higher level of rigor and and in terms of governance, it actually is a much cleaner structure. So a lot of for-profit, non-profit donors prefer Section 8 companies. But then again, think about the type of work that you're doing, right? If you're setting up a school, then a trust makes sense. If you've got enough people to get on your trusteeship, then a society makes sense. When you start a society, you need to have 5 trustees. When you start a Section 8 company, you need to only have 2, but you need to have a memorandum of understanding and an articles of association, memorandum of association and an article of association set up. So these are something that a chartered accountant / company secretary will help you set up. There are a lot of good entities out there that do this really cost effectively and do this really easily within a short time frame. So the setup for each is actually different. Tax exemption is applicable for all of these non-profit entities, but just remember that ATG approval takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and FCRA approval takes anywhere up to 3 years. So you really need to think about where your funding is coming from and whether you have the ability to take in that money at that time. In terms of for-profit entities, again, a whole bunch of entities exist. You can have a one-person company that was just introduced in the New Companies Act in 2013. You can be a proprietorship, you can be a limited liability partnership, you can be a full partnership, you can be a private limited company. Just remember, if you're setting up as a for-profit enterprise, investors prefer private limited companies because it allows you to give out shares that an investor can then buy, right, when they're making the investment into your company. So again, the process for setting up one of these enterprises is fairly straightforward, doesn't take a lot of time. It is possible to switch from a non-profit entity into a for-profit entity. And again, any CS, any company secretary will help you go through this. Technically, registering your company should not cost more than ₹1,00,000, but account for about 2. That's the most it will take. It's going to take you about 3 months to register your company, and that's the outer estimate of it. Additional clearances, like I mentioned, the ATG, FCRA take longer. I strongly urge you to use a known firm with a chartered accountant and a company secretary, someone that you have been referred to, someone that's a trusted friend has used before. But I really think going with someone that knows what they're doing is much more critical in this particular area, because they will allow you to do this much cheaper and do this much quicker. Right? So that's generally in terms of registering your company. So we've got a couple of questions come up, and I'm going to ask you guys to keep typing in questions if you have more. So Prachur is asking about companies can give CSR to nonprofits only, right? Yes. Right now, the CSR rule is that they can only give to nonprofit entities. So if you are going to raise CSR funding, and in the foreseeable future, CSR funding is going to be your only source of funding, then yes, you might need to be registered as a nonprofit. However, remember that incubators such as Wilgrow, not to pitch ourselves, but incubators can also receive CSR funding and then invest into give out grants into a social enterprise. So that route is also possible. With the CSR funding right now, people are still trying to figure it out. I think everyone is debating how this can be used, but there is a little bit of leeway there. Just as an addendum to that, I think people also want to know if governments prefer working with nonprofits or for-profits. I don't think it matters. Governments work with both. They do have a slight bias where they work more with nonprofits than they do with for-profits. They also prefer your donors to be local Indian donors. The minute you have foreign money coming in, it adds a bit of scrutiny to the process. So that's another consideration that you want to make in terms of long-term goals. If I want to work with the government, if I want to work exclusively with CSR funding, in terms of setting up your enterprise. Ankit wants to know if incorporation refers to only a company or would a trust count as well? Yeah, anything. So whether you're incorporating as a trust or incorporating as a company, you need to still have a certificate of incorporation, which the government needs to give you. So for trusts and societies, it means you need to have a certain number of trustees. You need to have a very clearly defined role that the company is going to play. There's a social good element involved in that as well. And then there is also, they will ask you to define what your articles of association are going to be, what work you're going to do, etc. With a private limited company, it's a little easier than that, but you still need to incorporate that as well. Other questions before we switch to fundraising? give it a couple of seconds. All right, I'm going to let you guys think about it. Divyang is going to speak about the fundraising bit, and then we can do a last round of questions if folks have questions after that as well.
Thanks, Kavita. Hi, everyone. I'll start with fundraising. Just a very small thing to add to one of the questions you asked. So Kavita was right. CSRs do give to non-profits only, but in a lot of cases, a lot of firms have sort of funds which they keep as corpus or something which they can invest wherever they want to. So there are a lot of them call them, innovation foundations or something on those lines. So that is still so corporate funding is still an option, but they usually do go for established entrepreneurs who've shown impact on the ground. But yeah, so starting with the fundraising. So first steps, before let's say you start going and meeting people and fundraising, is to have a fundraising plan, right? Which is a detailed plan for fundraising for the next few years, however many years you can manage without too many variables. So things like these can be potential funders that I will target. These are their funding preferences. This is how I will plan to reach out to them. These are the specific asks I have from the funders, because you only get so many meetings with funders. So it's important to have all these things clear before you go into a meeting. Another thing that is important, and Kavita alluded to this as well, is the budget. Preparing a detailed budget, preferably a 3-year one, is always a sign of not just a sign of confidence to the funder, which it is, but also for you to know exactly what you're looking for and how much you need to raise, and what the timelines should be. And the third thing, which is probably in terms of the actual meeting itself, the most could be said the most important thing is the fundraising pitch itself, which is there are two forms which fundraising pitches have taken in the meetings I've been to. I've actually primarily been to meetings with CSR heads across the country, but as a follow up or even during the meeting, it's usually a good idea to have a one pager on your org or a full deck, depending upon the preference of the funder. So one second, Swat. Actually, how about this? I'll just finish the slides pretty quickly. There's nothing, no rocket science here, and then I'll go to each of the questions. The next one is so fundraising pitch, right? Because fundraising plan and budget are actually, fundraising plan is very specific to an organization, and a budget, well, so is the budget, and both of them require slightly longer sessions. But I can just quickly allude to what usually a good fundraising pitch entails. So you usually start with a problem, defining it very clearly, and there are actually, easy as it may sound, there are problems which take a very long time for funders to comprehend. So the easier and the clearer you make it to them, and breaking it down into different components, it's basically laying out the whole framework for what the deck will follow, right? If you can convince them that this is a problem worth sharing, worth solving, then the rest of the things follow very naturally. The next is, what a solution to this problem might be, or what potential solutions might be, and then what your business model and your solution is to combat this. Actually, another thing a lot of people do in their fundraising pitches, and that's how they start usually, or sometimes end, is what they sometimes call a hook or a story or a personal sort of thing, which is to get the funder involved in your organization. So it could be an anecdote about someone whose life has been impacted by your organization. It could be anything, right? And I'm happy to sort of share best practices on a fundraising pitch as well. Again, it will take longer to sort of go over what each of the slides on that deck or that one pager would look like. Next is the growth plans. What you plan to do for the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years, and this is actually very important to funders because a lot of them want to have long-term relationships, and it's very important to align on what the long-term vision is. The next one is budget financials. Usually, a lot of people usually put this in the appendix. Depends upon. There's usually more of a follow-up conversation thing than an initial one when you're actually meeting them. But it's very important to have these pinned down. And the last one is impact, right? And again, having said that, it's very hard to sort of show very clear impact parameters. I mean, it could range from a very stellar impact evaluation by a third party evaluator to a very anecdotal story, right? But it's important to let them know that you're thinking about it. And I'll cover this a little more in the following slides. Avenues of funding. So in India, and I'm guessing it holds true for the rest of the world as well, is foundations, domestic and international, CSR/corporates and individuals. I didn't specifically mention the government, which is actually another potential avenue for funding, because that's more of a partnership sort of thing, and very you can't really prepare much for that. It's more area dependent, government dependent. It's something that I will not be able to comment on clearly. So that's one. I mean, another one that I can think of, maybe in other countries, could be sovereign funds. I don't know about that, but just for our purposes of discussion, these are the three avenues for funding. And there's a note that for organizations that are less than 3 years old or don't have an FCRA, and I say the 3 years old thing because of the new CSR rule that came out, domestic foundations and individuals are the best bet, because international foundations and CSRs international foundations and CSR arms of firms based outside of India would both need an FCRA requirement, because that's usually where their money comes from. And the Indian CSR agent in CSR arms of Indian firms or corporates would also require the 3-year rule. So domestic foundations, meaning someone like a Central Square Foundation, or there's a ton of foundations, or even Will Grow, although that's for the for-profit thing, would not have either of these two considerations. And same with individuals, right? Funder preferences. Again, so this is more, I'm not really saying many new things here. These are just things that came out of, these are just observations that came out of my meetings with a lot of these funders. And things like what constitutes a good meeting, what would be a success at the end of the meeting can depend on a lot of things. There are some things that funders prefer. There are a lot of things that funders prefer, and some of those are actually under your control. So if you can work on those before going into the meeting, they would definitely play to your advantage. And again, there are some things that are completely outside of your control, right? Which you can do nothing about. But again, these are things to be cognizant of when you are going in the meeting, because these are usually the points which come up when they are making a decision. First one being strong board. If when I say strong, right? If people, they identify whether it are stalwarts in their respective industries. If they've backed you, right, it's much easier for someone who's not really been with you when you started and hasn't seen you grow and doesn't have a personal connection with you back you as well. Similarly, and this is also very important, there's a clearly defined impact slide. You could have as I mentioned before, the best thing would be to have as rigorous an impact evaluation of your program as possible. But it could be, the point to get across is they want to see where their money is going, right? And you want to convince them that you know exactly the impact that money is making, so that they can be very clear, because they have very strong reporting standards. Which will bring me to my fourth point, which I'll actually start now, which is strong governance, right? I mean, the bare minimum is for you to be compliant with all regulations, with the Companies Act and with all the other regulations that a financial transaction might entail. But the other thing is, actually, when I say strong governance, is them being very comfortable knowing where their money is going. And that's where the impact comes in. That's where the whole board comes in. So this is another very strong point that you can have to convince funders to fund you. And the third one is clear vision for scale. Again, as I said before, a lot of funders are, a lot of the times you will hear this dialogue, which is, we're not in the business of just writing checks. And what they mean by that is that I mean, the one thing is that they want to be involved beyond just funding, but the second thing is also to have a long-term partnership, because for them as well, they don't want to go through a whole due diligence cycle every year. So if you have a clear vision for scale, and if you can align with them, and if you both, and basically if you both can align on this, it's a strong positive. Again, things that are outside of your control, which you can do nothing about, is geography, right? A lot of the funders have preferences where they do city specific funding. A lot of them have rural, urban. Some of them have, they will only do it if you're present in rural areas. A lot of them will actually, and this is very true for manufacturing. Again, speaking from my CSR experience, very true for manufacturing organizations and the PSUs. They will usually do it around their plants. A lot of the IT companies or even the financial institutions will do it in cities they are present in. So I'm not saying rural is easier than urban or vice versa. It's just very dependent on the company itself. And the second thing is focus area slash alignment with their goals, right? A lot of, especially now, I think this is becoming more true, which is that because the act has been in place for 2 years, a lot of the CSRs have devised a strategy. A lot of the times it's things like, we're a financial institution and we will only do financial literacy, right? So it has to, a lot of the times it's dependent upon the kind of work they do. A lot of the times it could be that, no one is supporting early childhood education in India. One of the funders I met actually said this, that very few people are doing this, and we really want to be the sort of trendsetters, or the torch bearers of this segment. So we will only do that, even though it had no relation to their core business. So it could be anything, but the point is that if they have specific needs, well, if they have specific goals or focus areas, and you don't align with that, it gets very difficult to actually receive funding. Last slide, which is, so I've outlined the challenges in a way, and have given some background. But things like, so what do you do, right? A lot of you, especially on the webinar right now, have formed organizations, or will form organizations that will not be 3 years old, right? They will just be formed as we go along. So you will not have an FCRA, and you will be less than 3 years old. So what do you do? I mean, the first point, as I said before, is focus on domestic funders. The second is, well, and when I say domestic funders, I count both the foundations and the individuals. The second is actually find domestic incubators. So there are, because incubators in India, I mean, in this space, are actually cognizant of this roadblock. A lot of them, as part of their incubation service, if service is the wrong word, as part of their incubation support, actually also offer, that maybe they can sort of take on funding from the CSRs or from whoever else, and can then give it to the organizations they choose to, which could be you. So I haven't really delved much into this, but I know there is scope for this. So if you have any specific questions in mind regarding this point, feel free to reach out, and I'll do a little more research on this as well. And the last thing that you can do is you can apply for it's not even a pre-FCRA, it's almost like a promise of an FCRA for one organization. Well, actually for one transaction only. So let's say you're 2 years old, you're 2.5 years old, even, you could be 1.5 year old, but you know that this is a super critical transaction. There's a lot of money that you're getting. Someone is super interested in you, and or it could be simply that it's hard to stay afloat until I get the next grant, where you can actually lock in. There's some allowance for you to have one exception, where you can promise, almost get as a promissory note that you will receive this one batch of funding, even if you don't have FCRA. The second thing is, no impact assessment yet. So both these points that I have here are relevant to sort of organizations that are present on the webinar, right? Because a lot of you, well, I'm guessing actually none of you would have very strong impact assessment parameters yet, because you haven't really put your programs on the ground. So the first thing that really works is anecdotal impact stories, right? Everyone would they funders also understand, right? You can't have very rigorous impact evaluation in the first year itself. But what would really help is that you can have a bunch of anecdotal stories where you can link how your organization or what you have done has made a significant impact in the way you intended in the lives of the people you're serving. So these are very powerful. Usually there's a whole page dedicated to this on the fundraising pitch. The second one is clear plans for monitoring and evaluation, and this is all about intent, right? um, they want to see, which is very perfectly legitimate as well, that you're very serious about monitoring and evaluation in terms of impact in your organization. So definitely stress upon this point as well. There's teams that I've sort of worked with who haven't done a third party evaluation, but who've developed an in-house rubric. This is how we plan to measure data that we receive from our programs. This is the in-house rubric we've developed, and this is how we plan to do it. So it shows intent, right? It signals that, and that's, I think, a great first step as well. So I think these are some of the points. I still haven't looked at the laptop, so I'll just um, look at some questions that might be. So there's three questions. Actually, there's two questions. So so Q&A. Also, feel free to. So I've been doing this for some time. So feel free to send, I don't know, start documents that you may have that you want sort of advice on, that in terms of fundraising pitch, even a plan, anything of that sort, or just any questions you might have that you want to take offline that are slightly longer. Please feel free to reach out. Would be happy to answer them. So Swati asks, what all should be included in fundraising proposal? To what extent should financials be included, and what portion of the budget requirement should be demanded? Wow, that's a okay. So what should, so let's take each one by one. What should be included in the fundraising proposal? Well, that again, different people do it differently. Fundraising proposal, I would actually open some on my laptop if I wasn't sharing the deck with you guys. Well, usually think the single one thing they're interested in is, where is our money going. Having said that, it's usually so this is actually the one pager I was talking about. Usually what happens is, you'll send that one pager as a follow up. They will say, yes, we like you, can send us a proposal. Then you will almost make that one pager into a two pager and send it back to them. So now the first pager will obviously have things like, this is what our organization does, this is our team, this is what we've done so far, this is what we plan to do, and this is, let's say, a per unit cost of what we're doing. So if you're doing a principal training program, per principal, this is what it takes us to train them. If you're doing a teacher training, same thing. If you're doing an SMC program, this is what it takes to train one SMC. And then you incorporate all the costs, right? When I say train an SMC, human resources, actual training materials in terms of time, everything, right? The more you break it down and the more granular you make it, the better it is. So those will all come on the one pager that you'll send initially. And I'm happy to talk about the order as well afterwards. What should come first, what should not. It also depends on what kind of organization you have. The second pager would obviously be, this is the money we're asking. This is the timeline we're asking it for. Usually it's a financial year, depending upon the kind. So usually it'll be either Jan to December or April to March. That's those are the two cycles in which companies work. And in terms of what portion of the budget, well, that is it depends, right? I mean, if you have a 30 crore budget, I'm guessing you will not, this versus you having a 30 lakh budget, the percentage would be very different. I think it depends. In the first meeting, try, I'm not saying ask what kind of what is the amount of grant money rather, that the firms have given out, but try and do your research, right? It's a very case by case. It depends, it varies a lot. So if it's a very small organization in India, they're just starting out, when I say small, it could be a very large organization, but one that has just started their India operations. They're just looking out. They're looking for a small, they're just looking to sort of uh, compl- be compliant, just looking to give small grants. It would be very different than, let's say, you meeting an established company that has been around in India for 30 years, right? And which has been doing CSR as part of their DNA and which has a very large budget, right? So a lot of these things figure in. I think it's going to be on a very case to case basis, and Kavita is going to add something as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, Swati, I think you just need to present your entire budget, right? Most funders will then decide how much they want to give you. We always ask, what is your requirement? And then we will match a certain amount of it. Also, funders like to see money coming in from more than one source. We don't want to be the only funder into the organization because we like knowing that others are also validating your idea and are willing to put their money into this particular idea or organization. So really, we like to do co-investments, co-funding for a grant-based model. So all of that exists as well. And just remember, funders are always a little bit flexible. We're happy to give somebody a little bit more, but we might think we need to give someone a little bit less because they've proven less, right? Whereas if you've proven your operations a lot more and we think that it's worth taking a risk on you, the entrepreneur, as well as the idea, then funders can be a little bit flexible. So always present the most realistic budget that you can. Funders are pretty firm about how much they will want to give you.
Yeah, and I think so. Excellent point, right? I think I completely agree with both of the things Kavita said, and just not to sort of take away from what I just said in the last 5, 6, 7 slides, but just to add on to what Kavita said, ultimately it will only depend on the kind of conversation you have and the kind of relationship you're able to build with funders. They will ultimately back the person. It's rare that I mean, obviously they have to agree on the model and everything, but ultimately it will depend on how well you can convince them that you are the right person they should invest in. So we can templatize this as much as we want. Percentage of budget. What should we take? What should the pitch have? But ultimately, it's all about the conversation and the relationship you can have. Moving on to Ashish. Sorry, go ahead, Kavita.
So Ashish wants to know how important is putting the impact in terms of measurable impact. What if the impact is not measurable right now? I don't think you need to put down measurable impact right now. I think that's okay. What you need to show is what the impact will be, right? So if you are doing something in the area of life skills and the impact is actually going to be 5, 10 years down the line, at least you really need to mention what that impact will be 5, 10 years down the line. You don't need to quantify it and say, 10 years down the line, 50% of my kids would actually have a job that's making them 10,000 rupees a month. That is not required. And funders will help you think through what that impact measurement needs to be as well. But just make sure you're showcasing that this is going to have impact on people at the bottom of the pyramid, kids from low income communities. We want to know how direct your impact is, whether this is intentional rather than a byproduct of other things that you're doing. Right? So as long as you're clarifying that and making it real, I think don't worry about quantifying it right now. That being said, for some of you that can quantify it, if you're running pilots, or the more information you have, the better. So if you can quantify it and if you can give us numbers, we're happy to look at them, right? But we understand that early stage numbers are very different from what it's going to end up being once you're running at scale. All right, the next question from Vivek is, how do we approach the right funders? So I don't know if there is a right funder. I think you need to approach at this stage pretty much every funder. As a funding organization, we talk to people constantly. We talk to people knowing that we may not even do grant or equity funding into this company for the next 12 to 18 months, and that's okay. What we what we like is funders that approach us very proactively and keep us engaged in that process, so that we are seeing their growth, we are seeing how they're moving, and it really does build that donor engagement and funder engagement that I was talking about earlier. I mean, just honestly Google it. And I think it's a two-way street, right? So Google it, list down the 10 funders that you want to talk to. as much as the funders need to like you, you need to like the funder that is putting money into your enterprise, right? Because you've taken their money. At the end of the day, you're accountable for that money. So you really need to like the people and the funders that you're working with. So make sure that your mission and the mission of the funding organization is aligned. Make sure, look at their portfolio, look at companies or enterprises that they have put money into, see if you like those, because that really tells you about the ethos, mindset, mission of the funding enterprise itself, but really make the effort to get to know your funder. I'm more inclined to fund a company that I've been speaking to for 3 months. I really know the founder, a founder, I really like them, so I'm happy to put money into them, but take that time. So I don't think there's a right funder. I think there is work to work you need to put in to find an aligned funder.
Just to add on to that, thanks, Kavita. Just to add on to that, two things. One, when Kavita says you should be meeting every funder, I would almost say, you should be meeting everyone in this space right now. That would be the best. It's a relatively small space, and people do get to, and everyone's connected, right? So the least you can sort of ask anyone in this space is to actually connect you to funders, right? That's another way of approaching the right funders. Just meet as many people in this space as possible, because they would have done the same when they would have gone for funding. And the second thing is, actually, when you do meet a funder, and this has happened before as well, and it's there's no alignment whatsoever, right? So as an example, you're working in ed, you meet someone who only does healthcare. There's absolutely no way where you could collaborate. Just make sure that you stay in touch, and then ask them to introduce you to other funders as well. There's a ton of CSR forums, philanthropy forums that keep happening, and a lot of these people and a lot of the circle sort of keeps meeting. So it's great to just be out there and try and meet as many people as you can. Ankit is asking, would large funders be uncomfortable if we were also crowdfunding alongside approaching them? I don't know if there's a right answer to this. I wouldn't even say experience, because I don't have experience in this, but if I were to take a guess, well, if I were to put myself in the funder's shoes, I would actually be pleased that someone is showing intent, and they've been able to raise money from the crowdsourcing platform as well. So I would not. I don't think funders really care much about what your well. Having a strong board is great. Having strong funders on board is great, but they're not super concerned about the different channels and the diversified sources you're receiving funding from. So no, I think I would actually I would encourage this. I think it shows a lot of positive intent on your part. Kavita, you agree? Yeah, she agrees. Anyone else? In any other questions that you may have? Also happy to answer any questions that you may have offline as well. I mean, you by now hopefully you have mine and Kavita's email address as well. So feel free to email us. I'll just go back to how do you go back, Kavita? Oh, stop sharing. Okay, so if there's no other, well, there are other questions. What kind of support does CSF Wilgrow provide on fundraising and registration? I'll let you answer the registration part. On fundraising, I'll answer the CSF part first, and then Kavita can answer the registration one. So, sorry, the Wilgrow one. In terms of CSF providing support on fundraising, we don't raise money for ourselves, so we don't really provide a lot of support on fundraising. We ourselves are funders, which is why we don't. That's not one of the support things that we offer. Having said that, for some of our older grants, what we do is actually help them connect with other funders, other CSR organizations, other corporates. But those are only for grants that we've been sort of supporting actually forever. The oldest grants we have. For new organizations that we incubate, fundraising is not a support that we offer. But if someone has been with us for some time and they, it's also about them being able to absorb funding money, right? Corporate money. So if when someone is at that stage, we're happy to help as well. Kavita, I'll just move so that you can take, or actually you can move the laptop.
Yeah, sometimes if we move the laptop, that will be.
Yeah.
No, so we don't provide registration support at all. We will connect you to people that can help you do registration, but we don't do it. And again, like CSF, we are your funders. So come to us when you want money, talk to us ahead of time whenever you want. We will help you raise additional funding post our engagement with the company, and we can connect you to others if we don't have the mandate right now, but we don't particularly support companies with their fundraising process.
Yeah. Any other questions?
No?
Okay. So we'll take your leave, I guess. Thank you so much for attending the webinar. I hope it was useful. Thanks, Kavita, for walking through the registration part. I had really no clue on any of that. Feel free to reach out on.
Sorry, we have.
Oh, we have another question. Sorry. Okay. I'll take this one. Well, I'll read this one. Are there any startups or companies who would help us to prepare fundraising proposal or help us to find the right funders or just fundraising consultancy? Actually, no. It's a very valid question. I think in terms of the stage of early stage, in terms of the stage, most of the companies or organizations at this webinar it would be very hard. Having said that, post the Companies Act, when the CSR law came out, a lot of CSR consulting agencies have come up, and I'm happy to share the names, offline when we've spoken to some of them, just to see how they work and what their model is. Usually, what the model is that they will take you on their platform, and then I think they will take a percentage of the funding you receive. Having said that, you would need to be at least 3 years in for that. So pre that, to the best of my knowledge, no.
My advice is don't outsource your fundraising proposal. Nobody knows your project or your enterprise as well as you do. And so the minute you outsource it, you're sending out information that is not accurate, even though you are sitting with that person to write it. So do your fundraising proposal. There's a lot of learning to do as founders to do this. We really want founders to own the process of fundraising. It cannot be outsourced, but the rest of the information that we not there.
Yeah, I think the more you iterate, the more meetings you have, you will actually come up with a really solid fundraising pitch. So no, what I can do is send you a template. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to create one and send it to you, like a basic one.
And a lot of funders, like we have a template, right?
Yeah,
so we can send you out a template.
Yeah.
When you apply to the group incubation on our website, there's a very clear list of questions that you need to answer, and that's really all you need to do. But they're fairly standard, right? Everyone wants to know the same kinds of things. What's your problem? What's your solution? What is your governance? All of that lovely stuff.
Devi seems quite shocked that it was actually a valid point. No, thank you. Thanks. So one other thing that we actually also do with our, and this is true for all the organizations that CSF supports, is actually help them do a mock pitch with us, help them refine their fundraising pitch, their plan, all of those things. So even though we might not connect sort of our very new grantees to funders directly, we will help in any way possible for them to be fully prepared for the meetings. So that is something that we do. Yeah. And I'm happy to offer whatever little I know about that process to any of you who wants more.
Well, Deep Dive template would be great. Yes. And so does Parinita.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, we'll send that. Anything else?
Also, in the interest of time, I think we are going to wrap. Thank you guys for joining us. Do write to Aditya or Divyang or I if you have questions that you need us to answer. And then just touch base with me.
There's more comments
Vivek, I believe, who was asking about the budget. So yeah, touch base with one of us that we can help you think through that. But thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you. Thanks.